What's going on, guys? So it's been a while since I did any kind of Vue.js project, so I wanted to jump in and build some kind of application with Vue.js 3, well 3.3 to be exact, and the composition API. And it's important to mention that because there's really two ways to structure your Vue components. There's the options API, which is the traditional way that groups data and methods by options, hence the name. But in version 3, the composition API was introduced, which is supposed to be a more organized way to structure the logic of your Vue components. And it also promotes reusability, readability, as well as reactivity, which allows components to automatically update the UI when the data changes, and eliminates the need for manual DOM manipulation. And of course, that's what every front-end framework aims for, is reactivity. I mean, the most popular one is called React. But the composition API gives us ways to achieve that very easily. And as far as the project goes, it may look familiar to you because it was actually part of my 20 vanilla JavaScript projects course. And I also did a React version of it on my channel a while ago. But basically, we keep track of our various income and expenses. So at the top, we have the total balance. Then we have the balance of income and the balance of expenses. And under that is the history or the transaction list. And you'll see if it's an expense, it has the red border and the minus sign. If it's a deposit, not a deposit, but income, then it has the green border. And we also have the delete when we hover over each of the transactions. And then at the bottom, we have a form to add a new transaction with a text and an amount field. So if we go ahead and add, let's say, a course, I created a course and made $500. So we just add just the amount, and that gets added. We get a toast up here because we're going to be using the Vue toastification package. Now, if we want to add an expense, what we would do, let's say we bought, I don't know, a video game. So if we bought a video game, then we just put a minus amount in front, or a minus symbol in front of the amount. So we'll say 70. And we can do decimals as well. We'll say 79.99. And then you'll see that that gets added as an expense and has the red border. And our balances have changed. It's reactive. And of course, if I wanted to delete something, I could just click this X. We get another toast saying transaction deleted. And if I reload, you'll notice that it all sticks because at the end, we're going to implement local storage. We'll start off with everything just being in the DOM, but then we'll add local storage functionality. As far as the code, I have the link in the description to the GitHub repo with everything. And you probably have to just copy the CSS and maybe some of the HTML from here. I also have the GitHub link to the 20 projects course, to the projects, and you can see there's an expense tracker. If I click on that, that's the vanilla JavaScript version. So you may just want to take a look at it, see how that works. But that's it. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, guys, so I have VS Code open, and of course you can use any text editor that you want. And I have an empty folder called Vue Expense Tracker. And then down here I have my terminal. And I also have the final repository here, as well as the vanilla version, because we're going to just need to grab some CSS and maybe some HTML from there as well. All right, so let's start off by generating a new Vue app using the Vue CLI. So we can use npx, just make sure you have Node.js installed on your system, and we can say create-vue at latest, and then I want to generate everything in the current folder, so I'll just put a period. And then it's going to ask us some questions. So the package name, I'll call it Vue-expense-tracker. And then all these, I'm basically just going to say no. So TypeScript, no, JSX support. The router, we don't need it because even though we have multiple components, we only have one view or one screen. So we'll say no to that. Pinia for state management, we'll say no. No for testing, and no for ESLint. All right, and you can see it just generated a bunch of files and folders. So we do have to run npm install or npm I. And then we can run the dev server with npm run dev. All right, now I know, let's just open this up. It's on 5174, and we just see the welcome page. Now I know a lot of you have experience with Vue.js, but just because there are some people that may not, I'm just going to explain some of these files real quick. So in the package.json, you can see for our main dependencies, we just have Vue, and then under dev dependencies, we have Vite. So Vite is a local dev server. So that's basically the tooling that we're using to have this server run and have hot reload and all that. And we can install plugins to Vite, and the Vue plugin obviously is all set up. And if we look at the Vite config file, you'll see that Vue plugin. And you're not really going to have to touch this file. I mean, if you want to change something like maybe the port number, you can do that from here, and you can check out this URL for any options. All right, now the index.html file is the single page of this single page application. So there's not much here. There's just this script tag using the type of module. So this isn't like Webpack where it constantly gets compiled or transpiled every time we save. It's actually loading that main.js as a module. And that main.js is in the source folder, and I'll get to that in a minute. And then there's this div with the ID of app. That's basically where our UI is rendered. Okay, and then that's pretty much it as far as this file. If you want to change the title, you can. I'm just going to call it expense tracker. Whoops. Expense tracker. And if I save, you'll see it just reloads. So we have hot reload. We don't have to refresh the page or anything like that. And then if we look in source, the main.js, that's basically the entry point for Vue.js. And there's not much here either. You can see it's very light. So we have this create app function, and that takes in the main component or the parent component, whatever you want to call it, and that's in this app.vue file. Okay, and then it's mounting that to that div that I just showed you with the ID of app. And then it's just bringing in a main.css, and we're actually going to wipe out all the CSS in a second. Then there's the app.vue file. As you can see, it's importing a couple components from this components folder, so hello world and so on. Again, we're going to delete all of this. And in the assets, that's where the CSS files are. All right, and there's nothing in the public except a favicon, which I actually have another one I'm going to use. Of course, this is completely optional, but you can get it from the final repo. So I'm just going to replace that, and it's just a little e-commerce. No, not e-commerce. What is it? It's like I guess like a little e-commerce thing. All right. So let's start off by deleting all of these files that we don't need. So everything in the assets folder, these 3 files, we're going to delete those. Everything in the components folder, including the icons folder, delete those. And in the app.vue, let's just get rid of everything and just put in a template and just say my app. All right. Now for the styling, like I said, we're going to get that from either the final project here or the vanilla project. It's both the same exact style sheet. So this style.css, I'm just going to copy the code from here. And what I'm going to do is in assets, I'm going to create a file called style.css. And I'm going to paste that in here. And if I save that, we go back to our application. Well, actually, it's not going to show yet because we have to bring it into the main.js. So I changed it to style. So we want to import that. And now you should see something like this. Okay, everything's going to be centered because if we look at the style sheet, the body we actually have displayed as a flex box, and we have flex direction and align items. Align items and justify content to the center. And if you want to look through the CSS, you can. It's nothing special. All right, so now that we have that, we can close up main.js. And what I'd like to do is just create all the component files that we're going to work with, just so we can kind of map things out and we know what we're doing. So if we look at the screenshot here, there's basically 5 different components I want to break this up into. And when you use a framework like Vue or React or Angular or Svelte, that's the idea, is to break your UI into different components, and then you can pass different data, different props into each one. So we're going to have the header component, which is just basically an H2, but if you want to add something else to it, you can. We're going to have the balance component, which will be the total balance. We'll have the income expenses component, which will be this, both income and expense. The transaction list, which will be this. and then the AddTransaction component, which will be this. And we're going to have them all work together, and everything's going to be reactive. So, for instance, when we add something, it's good. This component will be reactive, and the income or expense will change, as well as the total, as well as the transaction list. All right, so that's the beauty of a framework like this, is that everything is reactive and data is sent to any component that needs it. So let's create those files. In components, I'm going to create a header.view. So all components have a view extension, and you want to use an uppercase convention for the titles. And then let's create the next one, which is balance.view. Okay, then we have income expenses.view. Then we have the transaction list. So TransactionList.view. And finally, we have the AddTransaction, which is the form. Okay, so we have our files created, and I'm just going to close these up for now. And I'm going to leave the header open because what I want to do is just get the UI, just get the layout, so we can get the HTML from the vanilla project here. If you want to type it out, you can. You can see it's really not much. But for the header, it's going to be very simple. It's just going to be this H2. Now, the way that Vue templates work, for those of you that are brand new to this framework, we have everything in a component. We have the output, or the HTML, or the template, whatever you want to call it. We have the JavaScript, which is the logic or the functionality, and you can also have the style, which for us, we're just putting everything in one global style sheet, but you don't have to do it that way. Now the output is going to go in a template tag like this, and I just want to have that H2. Now if I wanted to put some logic in here, some JavaScript, then I would add a script tag and I'd put my JavaScript in there. And in addition, if I wanted to have styling, I could put a style tag in there. And when it has this scoped, that just means that any CSS I put in here is only going to pertain to this component. It's not going to, leak out into affecting other areas of the app. But for the header, I just want a simple template, just the output. Bring the header into the app.view and have it show in the browser. We have to then open up some script tags because we're importing something that's within JavaScript. So we're going to say import header from, and then /components/header.view. Okay, now the way that I'm doing it right now, if we want to embed it, like let's go up here and let's get rid of my app. And let's put in the header tag to embed that component. If I do it, you'll see it's not showing the header. It's not showing expense tracker, because with the way we're doing it, we actually have to have an export default, and then we have to register the component with components, which would be an object with any components you want to show in this file. So we have to register it here. Then if I save, it shows. However, there is a way around this using the newer script setup syntax, which I'm going to get into in a little bit. But I want to show you this way first, because this is kind of the traditional way of doing it, whether you're using composition or the options API. So next, let's do the balance. So I'll go back to just this regular HTML here, and notice everything else is in a div with the class of container. So in the app, let's go under the header and create a container class, and then all of our other components will go in there. So the balance is going to be this H4 and this H1. That's it. So we'll grab that, and remember, everything has to go in a template for our output, and we just have a 0 balance for now. Okay, I'll close that up. We can close the header up, and now let's import. We'll just copy that down, and we'll bring in balance, and then we'll register it down here, balance, and then up top, let's go in the container, and that's where we want to show the balance. Okay, so if we come back to our application, let me make this the first tab, you can see the $0 balance. All right, the next thing we're going to want, if we look at the screenshot, is this income expense. So if we go to the HTML, That's going to be this div right here. So if we go to income expense, we'll open up our template, paste that in, save it, and we'll bring that in as well. So that's going to be income, expenses, income expenses dot view, income expenses. We'll register it down here, and we'll add it up at the top. So income, expenses. Okay, so now that should show. All right, cool. So next we have the transaction list. So that's going to be this H3 of history and this UL. And it just has a commented out hard-coded list item, which we'll uncomment that. But let's put it in TransactionList.view. So we'll paste that in and we'll uncomment this list item just so we have something there. And I'm going to put another one as well. So let's copy that. So the way that we get the green or red border is with the class. So a class of minus gives a red border. So let's make this one a class of plus and take away the minus sign. And we'll say, I don't know, paycheck. So we'll say that we got a paycheck of, let's say, 800. All right, so we'll save that, and then let's bring it into our app.view. So that component is called what? Transaction list. And we want to bring that in down here, transaction list. Okay, save that. Let's check it out. And there we go. So you can see paycheck has the green border, cash has the red because it has this is a class of minus, that's a class of plus. So that's just CSS stuff. Same thing with the hover right here with the X. So let me just show you real quick where that comes in. There's the plus and minus class. So we just have the delete button, which is styled, but it's set to, let's see, the opacity is set to 0 by default. But then when we hover over it, I should say when we hover over the list item, we have the opacity set to 1. There's also a transition on it, which gives it that fade in, fade out. So just in case you're wondering, because I know CSS can be really confusing to a lot of people, including myself. So the last thing we want to do is the add transaction form. The last thing as far as the, just the layout. So we'll grab this H3 down to the ending form tag. Okay, don't get the div, that's the container. So we just want that. And let's go to add transaction, add our template, save it, bring it in. I just think it's better to just take care of this now rather than, do it all different times. So add transaction, that's going to be from /components/addTransaction.view. Okay, and then we're going to register that. And down up here, add transaction. All right, so we should have the whole layout here. Good. Obviously nothing works because we have no functionality, but at least we have the output. Now I think where I want to start is with the transaction list. So I just want to start off by having an array and render that as a list item with the transaction. Okay, so we're going to go to our transaction list component and start here. Now at the moment we just have some hard-coded items here, so we can comment those out, and now we don't have any showing. So I'm going to start off by having the array of transactions in this particular component, but remember the transactions, that's part of our what's called our global or app level state, because we need to access those transactions by multiple components. We need to get the balance, we need the income expense, we need to be able to add to them. So that's global state. So you're not going to want to keep those in this one transaction list component. we're going to want to keep it in our main app.view, because then we can send anything we want down into those components. Okay, and then you could also use a state manager like Pinya or Redux or something like that, but that's more for larger applications. For smaller applications, usually you'll keep your global state in your main app.view file. Now, we're going to be using the composition API, but just to give you an idea for those of you that are kind of brand new to Vue.js, I'll do it first with the options API. So show you how we would add data to this component. So of course we need our script tags, and what we would do is export as default, and then in these curly braces we can define our data. So it's actually a function that returns an object. Okay, and again, this is the options API. And I think I mentioned this already, but it's not that the options API is like deprecated and you shouldn't use it anymore. It's you can pick one or the other. So I just want you guys to know that you can still do it this way. So here we could say transactions, which would be an array. And for now, I'm just going to grab some dummy data and just put that in there. So if you want, you can copy that. Okay, now having this in our data, we should be able to access it in our template. So, and it's an array, so we're going to want to loop through it, and we're going to want to output one of these list items for each one. So let's do that. Let's say list item, and the way we can do this is using what's called a directive. So in your template, there's different directives you can use for conditionals and loops and form input binding, things like that. So to loop through something, we can use the v-for directive. So if we say v-for equals, and this could be on any element, but we're putting it on an li. So in the for right here, we're going to say transactions or transaction in transactions. Okay, so this could be anything. This transactions pertains to this right here. So this just represents a single transaction. Now this has to have a key. As you can see right here, it says elements in iteration expect to have a vbind key. And a key is just, it's going to be a unique value. Just like when you map over something in React and you create a list, you need to have a key as well. So we can say v-bind key equals, and then we'll set that to the transaction ID. So transaction.id. Okay, so this right here should match whatever this is. I could make this T if I want, but then I need to make this T, right? And then we can make this shorter. We don't even need to add the vbind. We can just do :key as a shorter way of doing this. Okay, now what we want to do inside the li is have one of these list items. So I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to paste that in. Actually, I'm sorry, I don't want the li because we already have that. I just want what's inside of it, which is this. Yeah, so we'll do that, and then I'm going to delete the comments. So let's save that. Now we're seeing cache 4 times because we have 4 items in the transactions array, and we're hard coding the word cache. So what we can do is get rid of that, and in here we can use double curly braces, and we can say transaction dot, and then whatever field we want, in this case text. And then for the amount, we'll keep the money sign there, and then we'll have our double curly braces, and we'll say transaction dot amount. So now if I save that, we see the text or the title here, and then we see the amounts. I just want to get rid of that minus sign, and that's kind of the next thing that I want to do is handle what are these income or expense, right? And we do that. We can tell the difference with the class of minus or plus on the list item. So we can actually use the class directive. So I'm going to go onto the list item here and go after the key and use :class. You could also do vbind :class. And this can actually have a conditional in it so that you can have a class based on some condition. So let's say if the transaction.amount, and let's just close that up. So if the transaction amount, let's say if that is less than 0, right? Because if we're doing a negative, then let's make that class minus. Okay, we'll put single quotes around that. Else, and we're just using a ternary here, else then it's going to be plus. So now when I save that, you can see the expenses have the red border and the incomes have the green border. So what we've done here is we've added data to our component state, a transaction array, and then we looped over it using the v-for directive, and we added the key, and we used the class directive as well to give a conditional class, and then we're outputting the transaction data. So again, this is the options API, and this is kind of how it is. Any data you have, you put in this data function, and you return an object. So if I wanted to put something else here, I could put, whatever, name, something, and so on. And then if we have methods that we want to use, we would go after the data, and we would do methods, and then we could define methods, all right? But we're not going to be using the options API, so now I'm going to switch this to the composition API, and there's actually two ways to do it. There is using the explicit setup function, because that's the idea, is you have this main setup function, and then you can put whatever data, whatever functions you want inside of that parent function, that setup. But there's a new syntax as of version 3.2 where you can just put setup right in the script, and you don't have to explicitly define that function. So I'm going to show you both ways. So I'm going to just grab the transactions here, and then I'm going to get rid of everything in the export default. All right, and what we would do is, again, have a setup function like this, and then we could create const transactions. So just like a regular variable. Oh, I already had transactions. All right, I'm just going to set that equal like that. And then if we do it this way where we have the explicit setup function, let's go under, see how it doesn't, it's not working anymore. It's because we have to return down here. We just have to return from the setup function the transactions. And I'm going to show you a shorter way in a second. But if I save, notice how it's working again. So this is a little more clear and concise, at least in my opinion, because we're just, simply creating a variable of transactions and returning it, and then we can use it up here. Now, like I said, there's an even shorter way of doing this. And by the way, if you wanted to create a function, you could just say, my function, create it, and then just return it here, my function, just like that, and then you could use it wherever. Now I'm going to show you the newer way to do it, which is by just putting setup right in the script tag. And then not only do we not have to return, and not only do we not have to use the setup function explicitly, we don't even have to use export default. So we can simply do this. Save it, and it works. So how cool is that? Now, like I said, we don't want to have the transactions in this transaction list function. We want this to be in our global state. So we're actually going to move this to the app.view. Now, before I do that, I'm also going to set this to use setup in our script. And watch this. We don't even have to do this anymore. We don't have to export default this components object. We can completely get rid of that, save it, and it still works. So all I'm doing is importing and using them in the template. So I'm going to move the transactions. I'm just going to grab that, and then we can get rid of these script tags. Okay, that's going to, the transactions will go away for a minute. Then we're going to put them in here like that. Now, before I do anything else, when you want a value, or for instance, this array, we want this to be reactive, meaning if we change something, if we add a transaction, delete, whatever, we want this to update. So we want it to be reactive. So there's a function that we want to bring in called ref. and anything you want to be reactive, you want to wrap in that function. So right here, what I'm going to do is say import, and in curly braces, we're going to import ref from Vue, and then I'm simply going to wrap the array in ref, like that. So that will make this reactive. And it's not going to show right now because we still have to pass it down to our transaction list in order for it to show. So let's do that next. Since we have this here, we can simply go to our transaction list function and we can say :transactions and just set that equal to our transactions. Okay, so we're taking this data, this array, and passing it in as a prop to the transaction list component. Now, in order to use that in the transaction list, we do have to use something called defineProps with the composition API. So let's add in our script tag again, or script setup. So pretty much everything that we do now is going to have a script setup, so we can do things kind of the easy way. And I'm going to import defineProps from Vue, and then we can do const props. We don't even have to do export default or anything like that. We can just say define props, and we're going to set that to we're going to pass in an object of transactions, because that's the prop we're passing in, and then we can just add a type to it. So the type is an array, and we can also say that it has to be required. So we'll say required true. All right, now if I save that, you can see that the transactions are back. So now we're not storing the transactions in this one component, it's in our main app component. So we can use these wherever. We can pass them to any components we want, and they're going to be reactive. So no matter, if we're deleting, adding, whatever we're doing, it's going to update in the transaction list component. All right, so hope that makes sense. When you want to pass props in, you do it like this, and you just use defineProps in the component that you're passing them to. That's going to have the total. So it's going to add all these together. And if it's negative, then obviously it's going to subtract it, right? If you take $299.97 and you add negative $19.99, it's going to subtract $19.99. So we're going to end up with the total. All right, now we're going to use something called the computed property, which is a way to create reactive and cached values. And it can depend on one or more reactive properties. In this case, it's going to depend on transactions. So we can use computed. We do have to import it. So right here, let's say import computed from Vue. And then we're going to put it down here. Okay, so I'm going to create a variable called total, and that's what I like about this API is that we don't have to put it in methods or in the object, the main object. We just create a variable or a function, and we can just use it. So we're going to set this to computed, and what computed takes in is a function. So we're going to pass in an arrow function, and what I'm going to do is return from this transactions. Now, I have to use the dot value. If I'm going to use one of these variables here, I have to use dot value. In fact, let me just comment that out for a second. You guys don't have to do this, but I just want to show you if I do a console log of transactions. That's spelt wrong. Transactions. All right, so I'm going to reload and then open up the console here. Okay, so what I get is this object, and you'll see there's a value property right here, and that is the actual, if we look in here, right here. So this is the actual data. So that's what you get with just transactions. However, if I do dot value like that and reload, that gives me the actual array. So you can see right here, array, and then it has the indexes and the values. So we want to use transactions value when we're in this, in this function. So let's get rid of that. Let's uncomment that, and let's say return transactions.value, and what I want to do is add them all together. So this is a good case for reduce. So let's say dot reduce, And in reduce, we're going to pass in a function, and we're going to pass in the accumulator, we'll say ACC, and then the individual transaction, and we just want to return the accumulator plus the transaction dot amount. Okay, and then after the function, the callback function, we're going to pass in 0 because that's where we want the accumulator to start. So it's going to start at 0, it's going to loop through, and it's going to add all of the transaction amounts. And that's going to be put in total. Now total is what I want to pass into the balance. So up here where we have balance, all we have to do is bind total. So we're passing in a prop of total, and we're going to pass in that value that we get from here. All right, now we need to go into our balance component, and just like we did with the transaction list, if we want to be able to take in a prop, we have to use defineProp. And we're going to say script setup, and let's do import, and we want to bring in defineProps from Vue, and then const props, defineProps, and let's pass in total. We're passing in total, and total is going to be a number, so let's say type number, and we'll set that to required true. All right, so now up here we're going to replace the $0 here. We'll keep the $sign, but we'll put in our double curly braces and then output the total, and there we go, $419.98. Okay, so anytime any of the transactions change, this is going to change because it's reactive. So if I go to the down here to the data, right? Actually, I mean, this isn't a good example because I'm just changing it here. But if I were to change it within the app, that would react to it as well. But obviously, if I change this to 300 and save, then that total is going to change as well. All right, so now we have the transaction list, we have the balance. Let's move on to the income expenses. So that's going to show the total of the income and the total of the expenses. And we're going to do something similar to what we did here. In fact, I'm going to just put a comment here. We'll say get total, and we're going to want to get, let's say, get income. And then we're going to want to get the expenses. And in order to do that, I'm going to use a couple high order array methods. We will use reduce, but we also need to filter out if it's an income or if it's an expense. So I'm actually going to copy this because it's pretty similar. So we'll change this variable here, or this property, to let's change it to income, and we're going to use computed. We're going to use the transactions value, but before we reduce it, so I'll put that on the next line. Before we reduce it, I'm going to use filter. So we want to filter out, let's pass in our function, and we want to say if the transaction dot amount, if that is greater than 0, because it's the income, right? It's if it's positive. So if it's greater than 0, then we're going to reduce, we're going to add it all together, and then I'm just going to add on to the end of this .2 fixed because I want to have 2 decimal places. So we'll say 2 fixed and 2. All right, and then to get the expenses is going to be very similar, almost the same thing, except let's change this to expenses. And we just want to change this right here in the filter. We want to say if the transaction amount is less than 0. And then we'll add those together. And then we'll, 2 decimal places. So now we have the 2 pieces of data that we're going to want to pass in as props to this component right here, income expenses. So let's say income, set that equal to income, and then expenses, set that equal to expenses. Okay, and then we have to accept those props in that component. So let's go to income and expenses, and let's see, we're going to just come down here, script, setup. And if you're coming from the options API, I'm sure you can see just, how much easier this is. So let's import defineProps from Vue, and then let's create our props. Okay, so we have income. The type will be a number. The required, set that to true. All right, then we just have our expenses, so we'll copy that. Expenses. And then we should be able to use those up here. Let's see, so I'm going to go right here. That will be income. This will be can't type, expenses. All right, so let's see. That still says 0. What did I do wrong? Let's open up the console. Extraneous non-props attributes total could not be calculated. Component renders fragment root nodes, unhandled error. Transaction is not defined. Let's see. The hell did I do wrong? Oh, in the filter. I should probably spell it right. We want to make sure we put transaction in there. So it didn't know what the hell this was. All right, let's save that, and there we go. So now the expense and the income, we got $449.97, which is this, plus this, negative $29.99, which is this plus this. All right, cool. So the next thing is the form. So this is probably going to be the most complicated part, because we're adding either income or expense, but we need to add it outside of this component, right? We need to send it up into the app.view because that's where the state is, right? It's not in the form component. And then we have to pass it. Well, it's already being passed down. It's already going to react here. But yeah, so let's go to the form. So add transaction. And let's see, where should we start? So the form is going to be submitted. So we need to have a submit event. So what we can do is go in the form tag and say @submit. And we're going to set that equal. Actually, you know what I'm going to do is use .prevent, because if you do it like this, then you don't have to pass in, E or event and do e.prevent default. It'll take care of that. So we'll say submit event, or prevent, sorry, and then we'll call it onSubmit, right? And that's going to be a function that we call in this component. So let's come down here. Let's say script, and we're going to add setup here, and let's create that function. So we'll say const onSubmit and set that. Okay, and then we'll just do a console log submit for now, just to make sure that that works. So open our console. Type check failed for prop. So what's going on here is, real quick, in the income expenses, it's defined as a number, but it's being passed in as a string. So right here, where it's being passed in, these are strings. So what we can do is we can just add a plus sign in front of them, and that will make them numbers. And if I save that, those errors go away. Okay. Now back to the form here. Let's submit and see what happens. Okay, we get a console log submit. Now we need to bind these inputs to a couple variables down here. And the way we do that, the way we bind form data is with the vModel attribute. So I'm going to go into this first input, and it's called text, right? It has an ID of text. So I'm going to say v-model and set that to text. And then for the amount, let's go down to the input. I'm actually going to make this a text, not a number, just so that we can have decimals. And then I'm going to put v-model and set that to amount. Okay, now what we can do is come down here, and we're going to add refs to the text and the amount. So let's import ref. I don't know why I just put an uppercase. Import ref from Vue, and let's go right above the onSubmit, and let's create variables for text. So we'll set that to ref, and that's just going to be an empty string. Same thing with amount. Okay, and then in the console log, just to make sure that we're getting those values, let's do text, and it has to, remember, it has to be dot value if you're using it down here. So amount dot value. So now if I put something in here, whatever, hello 12, so you see I get hello 12. All right, now before we pass this data up to the app.view, I want to have some validation, because I don't want to be able to submit just empty inputs like this, because I can do that right now, as you can see. So I want to have some validation, but I want to have a nice display. I don't want to just do a stupid alert, a browser alert. So we're going to use a package called Vue Toastification. So let's install that real quick. I'm going to go down to my terminal. I'll just open up a new one here. So I'm going to do npm install, and then it's going to be Vue Toastification. And if you've ever used React Toastify, it's basically the same thing. So let's install that. What happened? Could not resolve dependency. Vue Toastification. Let's do @next. I think that. Yeah, that's what I did. All right, so now that should be installed. If you look in your package.json, you should see Vue Toastification. Now, there's a couple things we have to do to set this up, and if you go to the GitHub page, you'll see the exact steps that I'm about to do. So we need to go to our main.js, because we need to tell Vue to use this Vue Toastification. So up at the top here, I'm actually going to, let's move the CSS down. Actually, I'm just going to put it right there. I want the create app to be at the top. And then right under that, I'm going to import toast, and I'm going to import that from Vue-Toastification. Now, we need some styling with that, so there's a CSS file that we also want to import. And again, this is just direct from the documentation. So it's going to be Vue-Toastification /dist/index.css. So that'll be the styling. And this blue line, that's just my spell checker. Obviously, toastification isn't a real word, so just ignore that. And then let's see, what else do we want to do? We have to kind of dismantle this right here, because we have to call app.use and pass in that toast that we brought in. So what I'll do is create a variable called app, set that to create app like that, and then we can say app.mount here. So that's doing the same thing, but I want to do something in the middle here. I want to do something in the middle. I want to do app.use and then pass in toast. I think that's all we have to do. So let's save. Let's make sure we don't have any weird errors. All right, so now we should be able to use our toast. So let's go back into the add transaction because that's where we're going to do the validation. So we'll do the validation here, and then once that's done, whatever the values are, we'll pass that up to the app.view into the main state. So in the onSubmit, let's get rid of the, well, we'll keep the console log for now. And let's do an if statement. So I'm going to say if not text.value, right? Or if not amount.value, then I'm going to want to display an error. Now to use the toast, I do have to bring in up here. Let's go right here, and we're going to say import, and we're going to bring in use toast, and that's going to be from Vue toastification. Okay, and then I just have to initialize it, so I'm going to go right here and say const toast, set that equal to use toast, like that, and then I can come down here and I can say toast dot, and I can use success or error. So this is obviously an error, so I'm going to say toast dot error, and let's see, we'll just say both fields. Yeah, we'll say both fields must be filled, and then we'll return. Okay, and then if there is a text and amount value, then for now we'll just console log. But after that, I do want to just clear the fields, so we can say text.value equals nothing, and amount.value equals nothing. So let's try that out. So we won't put anything in. Okay, both fields must be filled. Okay, if I put one in, still doesn't work. If I put just the amount in, same thing. If I put both in, that works. Okay, good. Now, since we have the validation, we want to be able to emit an event that we can then basically catch in the app.view so that we can update the transaction list or update the state, which will then update the component in turn. To be able to emit an event, we're gonna, let's go right here and say const emit, and we want to set that to defineEmits, and then we're going to pass in here an array with the events, the custom events we want to submit. So you can call this whatever you want. I'm going to call it transaction submitted. Okay, so that's going to be a custom event that we can emit. So let's come back down here where we have the console log and get rid of that. And I'm just going to create an object that has both the text and the amount in it. So I'll call this transaction data, and set that to an object that has text, set that to the text.value, and then we want the amount, and the amount is going to be a string by default, and I actually want to parse it as a float. So I'm going to say parse float, and then pass in amount.value. All right, so we have the transaction data. Now let's call emit, because we want to emit that custom event. So it's going to take in two things: the name of the custom event, which is transaction submitted, and then the data, which is transaction data. So if I submit this now, we're not going to see anything here, but it is going to be emitting the event. So we can go up to our app.view now, and we can basically listen for that event. So we can do that by going to the AddTransaction, because that's where it's being emitted from. And let's say so just like you would do like at submit if you're listening for a submit, but we're listening for a custom event called transaction submitted. Okay, so when that happens, then we want to call a function. I'm going to call that handle transaction submitted. A plus sign to total as well, just to make sure that that's a number. Okay, so all three of these should have plus signs. So now we need to create the handled transaction submitted function. So let's come down here and let's go right down at the bottom and let's say add transaction. So say const handle transaction submitted. So that gets passed in the transaction data, right? So right here, which is going to be this text and an amount. So let's pass in here transaction data. And just to make sure that that works, let's console log. What do we want to console log? Transaction data. Whoops. So let's check it out. Let's say hello 12 and let's open our console. That's nothing, that'll go away. So let's add and we see the object text hello amount 12. Okay, so we know we're getting the data. So now what we want to do is add it to this, right? Add it to this transactions. Now notice that these have an ID, right? But we don't have an ID when we submit the form. So we're just going to have to create a helper function that will generate a unique ID for us. So let's come down here. Let's get rid of this console log. And let's say transactions. So the transactions array, we want the value of the array. And then we're going to push onto that. And we want to push an object that has an ID, which we're going to set to a function called generate unique ID. Make sure you put parentheses here. And then the text is going to come from the transaction data dot text, and then the amount will come from the transaction data dot amount. So that will add to the transactions array. Now let's just create that generate ID real quick. So we'll say generate unique ID, and you can do this however you want. I'm just going to do something really simple. So we'll set that, whoops. We'll set that to return, let's say math.floor, and then we'll use math.random, and we'll multiply that by, let's say, 1,000,000. All right, and then I just want to come up here and I want to make sure that that ID is there. So I'm just going to do a console log of let's say, I guess I just want to see the ID. So we'll say generate unique ID just to make sure that that function is working. And it should get added to the array here. It should get added here. So let's just say test 10 add. Okay, so you can see it gets added, and then we see the ID down here. Good. Now I do want to just show a toast that says it's been added successfully. So we can do that, but we need to just bring in the toast package or use toast. So we'll do that right here. Let's say import use to wait, is it default or no? Let's see, what do we do here? Yeah, we need this. Okay, and then we just need to initialize it. So I'll go right here and say const toast equals use toast. And then let's go back down to where we add the transaction and just say toast dot success, and we'll say transaction added. So now if I add something, there we go. And that was added as income. If I wanted to add an expense, like let's say TV minus 200, if I add that, you can see that now that gets added as an expense, and it takes away from the balance and adds to the expense. Good. Of course, it doesn't stick if I reload because we haven't dealt with local storage yet. But what I want to do before that is I want to be able to delete these as well. So let's close all this stuff up. We just need the app app.view and TransactionList.view, because that's where we have the delete button, which right now obviously does nothing. So let's add an event to this. We're going to say @click. Okay, so when we click this button, we're going to call delete transaction, and we're going to want the ID. So we'll pass in here transaction.id. And then we're going to come down here and create that function, delete transaction. It's going to take in an ID. Okay, and then we just want to emit up to the app.view, obviously, because that's where our state is, right? That's where our transactions are. So to emit a custom event, just like we did in the add, let's say const emit equals defineEmits, which takes in an array, and we can add our custom event here, which I'm going to call transaction deleted. And then all we have to do down here is emit that event, transaction deleted, and we can pass along the ID. Okay, so now let's go to app.view, and we're going to catch that, or listen, I should say listen for that event up here in the transaction list component. So here we're going to say @ and then what do we call it? Transaction deleted. When that's fired off, we're going to call handle transaction deleted. So we'll come down here and let's say delete transaction. So const handle transaction deleted, and that's going to take in an ID. And for now, let's console log the ID just to make sure that works. So if we do that, see we get 1, 4, good. So we're getting the ID. And just to test out, if we add something here and then we delete it, we get the ID, which is just generated from our function. Okay, so in this function, what we're going to want to do is just filter out the transaction from the DOM, from the state, right? And then we'll deal with local storage after. So to do that, we can say transactions.value, which is the array in our state. We're going to set that to transactions.value.filter, because we want to filter out. Let's pass a function in here and say for each transaction, we want to just filter out where, let's say, transaction.id is not equal to the ID that's passed in. And then we'll do a success, so toast.success, and we'll say transaction deleted. Okay, so now let's click this. We get transaction deleted, and you can see everything reacts to it, right? So flour, if I get rid of that, the expense goes down to 10. I don't want that negative sign there twice. Let's see. No, that's not the right component. Income expense. Yeah, we want to get rid of that. I thought I already did that, but all right. So we can add, we can delete. The only thing really left to do here is local storage, because we want to be able to, we want it to stick, right? Otherwise, it's a pretty useless app. So let's go into our app.view and let's get rid of the dummy data. We'll just have this be just an empty array. So now that stuff's gone. And the first thing I want to do is check local storage, and if there are items there, if there are transactions there, then we want to show them. So we can actually use a lifecycle method called OnMounted, which fires off automatically when the component mounts. So let's say OnMounted, we're going to bring it in from Vue, and then we just need to define down here OnMounted, which takes in a function. It works similar to useEffect in React. And then what we're going to do is const, let's say saved transactions, and we want to check local storage. So I'm going to run it through JSON.parse because only strings are in local storage. This will turn it back into a regular array. We'll check local storage with local storage.getItem, and it's going to be called transactions. That's the key. And then we just want to check to see if there are any saved transactions. So if saved transactions, then let's set the transactions dot value equal to the saved transactions. So it's so straightforward, and that's something that I think is unique from, I shouldn't say unique, but different from React. With React and I'm not talking about Next.js or anything like that, server rendering frameworks, but with client-side React, dealing with side effects, dealing with state is kind of messy in my opinion. And it's getting better, but it's not as straightforward as this. You're not just setting the actual value in the state to something. You have to do it in silly ways, in my opinion. And I'm not trying to shit on React. I would say it's my favorite front-end framework, but there are some things that just I feel could be better, and I think that Vue does a good job of that. Anyways, so I didn't mean to go on to off on a rant. So now if we look at here, I don't have anything because there's nothing in local storage, but if there were, then it should show here. Now we need to make sure that when we add or delete, that it changes local storage. It either adds or removes. So we can create a single function to do that. So down here, let's say save to local storage, right? And whether we're adding or deleting, we're saving to local storage. Even if we delete, we need to save the rest of the items to local storage with that one deleted. So let's and this is going to be pretty simple. So let's say const save not saved, save transactions to local storage. Okay, and then all we're going to do is then set local storage set item, and we want to set transactions, and then we just want to wrap the transactions in JSON.stringify because local storage saves strings, and then we can pass in here our transactions dot value. Okay, and then all we have to do is call this function when we add or delete. So in the handled transaction submitted, right after we change that state, we can call that function. Okay, and we'll just do it right before the success. Make sure you add the parentheses. And then same thing with the delete, handle transaction delete, we'll do it right here. All right, so now if I add something here, let's say paycheck 900, and then I reload, it stays because it's in local storage. If I go to my application tab, you can see it right here. So there's the ID, text, amount, and so on. Okay, let's say I bought a TV, say minus 200, reload, that gets added. Now if I delete the TV, it goes back, and if I reload, that's still gone. Okay, so it's being saved whether we add or delete. All right, so that's it, guys. We have an expense tracker, and we're using the composition API along with the newer script setup syntax, which I really like. I think everything is laid out nicely, and we simply have variables and functions. We don't have to put them in data functions or methods, method objects, stuff like that. I mean, it's fine if you want to use the options API. I just think that this is cleaner and just less boilerplate. So I like it, and hopefully this was clear. Feel free to add on to this if you want to be able to update the history or the transactions. That would be a nice option or a nice feature. But that's it. Thanks, guys, and I will see you next time.